Okay, here we go. Another shot at doing better. This week we're going to speak about democracy. So let's let things run for a second. Okay, here we go. This week we're going to speak about democracy. And the question is democracy more than 30 seconds with a pencil or a marker? So most of us, I'm assuming, have at one point or another um, gone into a voting booth and done your thing. So this podcast is going to, or this episode is going to examine whether democracy is only the act of voting, or whether democracy also includes everything that happens before and after the election day. So let me have a look here. So I want to bring out a scientific definition of what the present is, not the past, not the future, but the present. So in scientific circles, we are dealing with their definition, which is 50 to 200 milliseconds. And of course, there are 1,000 milliseconds in a second and 60 seconds in a minute. So a standard definition of the present is not a day, it's not a week, it's not an hour, it's 50 to 200 milliseconds. And there are those, excuse me, that determine the present is 1 picosecond. So I guess the point here is democracy a long-term thing? Is democracy the beginning of democracy in terms of the present being including the past, which would be defined as the moment after you have put your X on the voting tablet to the time the next election starts, or is democracy larger or smaller? Okay, so when do the statistics pertaining to when voters decide? Do they make a choice at the voting booth? Do they decide on the way to the voting station? Do they decide during the prior elected activities of a government? As in, do they hate what's going on now and they've made their decision on how to vote, say, 3 years in the past? Or are they totally undecided and they're going to make their voting decision at the moment they enter the voting booth? And I tried to find out when does these choices occur. So is it in the voting booth or long before that? And I want to speak about a gentleman I know, extremely wealthy. He passed, he's an American resident, lived down in Fort Lauderdale, and I knew him for, I don't know, 10, 15 years. And he and I had many discussions about democracy and voting and the American system. And I found out, I asked him, does he vote for party or for candidate or per platform? And his answer was, and he's passed, so I won't use his name, but he's not here with us now. He said, I vote party. He said, I vote party as my father did and as my grandfather did. And I said, do you know who the candidate for your party is? Nope. I said, I don't care. I vote party. And I am not totally aware of the issues and legalities about voters giving funds to their party. But I do have some of the stats about Canadian legalities. But in any case, he donated a lot of money to his party every year, and he didn't care what the platform or the candidate was. And I asked him, being facetious, I said, if Hitler was running as the leadership candidate of your party, would you vote for him? So I don't care who it is, he said. I only care about the party. So there you go. So there's one American gentleman, and he was well versed, well educated, but he didn't seem to care about the party candidates or the platforms they ran on. He was a staunch Democrat, and if he was Republican, I would have said Republican. But he was a staunch Democrat, and he just didn't care. He gave money to the Democratic Party. He voted for the Democratic Party. He didn't know anything about the platform or anything else. That's what he did. So okay, so so his Democratic choice was the party, the party, the party. He didn't care, and that was all that mattered to him. So what is interesting about analysis of recent U.S. elections, I had more difficulty discovering what election statistics were available in Canada. I don't know why, but I did. In any case, it was determined that only 3 to 4% of the electorate going into the voting booths were undetermined or undecided. Everyone else, the majority of the other people had already determined their voter selection, and I don't know how many of those were like my friend who just voted party. That was it. But generally in the U.S., when 100 people are going into a voting booth, assuming they're all legitimate, won't get into that illegal voting nonsense down the states, but only 3 or 4 of 100 are actually undetermined on who they're going to vote for or what party they're going to go for. So many voters decide at different times on who they're going to vote for. Some decide years before, like my friend. Others decide based on an election campaign and hearing the arguments and proposals, more focused on the Canadian experience. Some decide after debates, interviews, or major events. A small number decide very late in the election, as in that 3 or 4%. So people assume that they vote on a specific day or a time frame when the election booths are open. Well, that's true, but many make their choice uh, months, weeks, even years before they actually reach the election booth, which is interesting. Um, so some remained unchanged, like my friend in Florida. Um, Others, they consider their vote and make their vote based on the criteria. So I looked up the stats relating to how older men, young voters, and first-time voters, how are they likely to vote? Um, so again, I had trouble finding Canadian stats, but in the U.S., women have registered and voted at higher rates than men in every presidential election where stats were recorded. Um, and that in itself is very interesting. Young voters from the States are about 47% of Americans who did vote, and their participation was much lower than older adults. Older adults consistently voted, where younger people it was spotty. They would vote one year and let the next year go. So let's look at the turnout. The stats show in the U.S. that women of all ages participate in the electoral process more than men, which is interesting. Um, but it does show that older citizens tend to vote higher than younger people. Um, so before the election day arrives, or the election week, as it's in Canada, we have many days we can go and vote before the actual day. Um, so uh, younger people seem to vote more so on the actual last day when elections can occur. Other people, older people, statistically vote on the days, as in Canada, the week or 10 days before the actual close of the voting. So let's speak about pre-election and the topic of democracy. Is democracy actually more than 30 seconds when you mark your ballot? And it probably is. Um, when you've done work, you realize there's information gathering, campaigns, media, social media, um, all trying to garner the vote, the individual vote. And why some don't vote um, is because they've been disenfranchised. They don't feel there's any point. I have a friend who has a home in Mississauga and a cottage home up north, and it's not a cottage; it's a cottage home. So he has the legal right to vote in either location, in Mississauga or up north. And I've challenged him on a number of occasions uh, to actually vote, and his answer consistently is, "I already know the outcome. What's the point?" He just doesn't care. He doesn't exercise his democratic right to vote. He just takes the attitude, doesn't matter, which is discouraging. I don't like the idea. Some people say there's the people have a civilian requirement to vote. There's another word I'm coming up short on, but I don't like to see more laws introduced. Um, first thing we're going to have a law with penalties if you don't vote. I don't like that. I don't think that's democracy, or that's not the democracy I grew up with. In any case, so for many people, democracy is only the few minutes it takes to mark your ballot and move on. And is this really the end of democracy? After the ballots are cast, does democracy end on election night? My friend who gives me this nonsense that he doesn't vote because he doesn't see any point to it, well, clearly, with his attitude, there's really no point. He's already decided that his vote means nothing. So is democracy over when people vote, the election's over, the winner's declared, government takes office, but is democracy finished then? So what about accountability? Most of us know that governments, candidates, they run on platforms. But again, most of us know these platforms are all BS. They mean nothing. They don't adhere to anything they say, or next to nothing they say. I've heard some of the answers are, oh, well, we didn't know before we got into office, we didn't realize the financial position of the Canadian federal government. And I'm speaking more about the federal government right now. And so they say the promises that we hoped, or the platform we ran on, and the promises we made, we can't fulfill them because we're in such dire fiscal straits. We just don't have the money. Well, it's a great excuse, and I'm sure it'll be used from here to eternity. But these platforms are what they purport, and they tell us, the populace, their electorate, they tell us this is what they're going to represent if we vote for them. Well, can we not hold them accountable? Well, I guess in terms of the potential to change course, if their feet were held to the fire and they said they were going to do X, Y, Z, and like a war comes up or a global disaster or something, well, then I can understand that the electoral platform it's necessary for it to change. But these governments don't always get in, and there's not necessarily a war going on. There's not the necessity to change path because of a global event, but they don't adhere to their policy in any case. So what we're hearing as the populace of Canada, the voters, is all crapola. When we hear a party running on a stated platform, we know that they're not going to adhere to it. Never going to happen. It just doesn't happen. When we look at government performance, if a government performs poorly, are voters already making up their minds about the next election, or do we have short-term memories? I mean, in the U.S., elections and the dates of elections are etched in stone. They know exactly when the next election is going to occur. In Canada, we sort of have a 4-year time frame, but it's not etched in stone. A government can call election at any time prior to that. They don't have to give, or they typically don't give 6 months notice that there's going to be an election. If they feel they're in a position of strength and they want to try for another 4 years, then they're going to call an election. I've seen them do that in 4 to 6 weeks, not giving the other parties an opportunity to present their platforms. But in any case, so this is all democracy. Let's look at this floor crossing or party jumping nonsense we or I created a podcast on that quite a while ago. It's I think it's pure insanity. I don't see it being democratic. Um, we as the electorate voted for candidates. We voted, and they presented themselves to run on a party platform. And when they get in, when they're elected, then some of them, not all of them, of course, some of them just jump across party lines, and they have total disregard for the people who voted for them or their constituency. They just give the middle finger and say, jump on it and twist. They don't care. And I'm not sure that's democratic. The votes of the constituency are totally disregarded. They just don't care. So I'm not sure that's democratic. Perhaps democracy is not at the ballot. Perhaps that's just a point of democracy. Perhaps democracy is the entire process from the beginning of when a party in power or minority is forced to have an election. Maybe democracy starts then, and perhaps it ends when you put your X on that ballot. I'm not sure. But clearly, democracy is more than the few seconds it takes to mark your ballot. I've questioned myself and a few friends about, are officials legally responsible for the pre-vote platforms, or they're allowed to say one thing before the election, and once in office do a 180-degree turn and give their middle finger to their voters? Is this democracy? Well, I don't think it is, but I'm not here to bend your arm or ask you to think as I do. But I am asking you to consider the options and how the candidates that we have voted for, how they react. Promises are made, platforms are published, speeches are given, voters listen, we evaluate, we make a choice. But what happens after the election day, after that the final ballots are counted and a new government is determined, are they legally or officially bound to keep these promises? Well, the answer is no. So this also brings to the surface, if these candidates and the parties that they allegedly represent, if there's no legal responsibility for them to do what's in their platform, then why bother? Why bother? Why not just make it a contest of beauty? Why not just, if a party needs X amount of candidates to have a majority, then just stand the people up, say, this person, this is their skill set, vote for them. Well, why run around and give us all this crap about, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that? Because they're not going to do it. They are not going to do it. The governments don't do what the platforms they run on, and if they do, it's such a weak, diluted version of what they promised. What's the point? In any case, so we as the electorate, what options do we have? We vote for these sons of guns. I can't use profanity. SOBs, we vote for them, they get into office, and what options do we have for the next 4 years once they're in? Basically nothing. Nothing. They're immune from the electorate until the next election. And people say, well, we'll make adjustments after the next 4 years or when the next election's called. Big deal. They have 4 years to do whatever they want without any electoral responsibility. It's democracy at its worst, as I would state it. Um, that's the only recourse we have as the electorate. 4 years down the road, we can vote them out. Or as occurs with my friend who's passed from Florida, multi-millionaire, if not close to a billionaire. He just votes party. He doesn't care. He doesn't care if Hitler was the head of the Democratic Party. He said, I vote for the Democratic Party. And I'm sure there's as equally a number of people who vote for the Republican Party. They don't care, which really brings to the point, is democracy so diluted? Are people so set in their ways that they leave the outcome of the vote to the 3 or 4% who actually go in and are not set on any party? They make a choice, which is the truth. So 3 or 4% of the populace generally determine the outcome. So let's take a look at how do we address the issue of financing and funding to the electorate or to the election. I don't know the actual methodology in the U.S., but my research states in Canada, let me just get to this, that we are allowed to contribute monies. I'm speaking about the federal now. For the federal parties, we can give $1,750, I believe this is correct, $1,750 per year to a registered party. We can give $1,750 per year to the party riding associations, candidates, and nomination contestants combined. There's $3,500 we can give legally. We can give $1,750 to leadership contestants, and we can give $1,750 to an independent candidate. So if you add that up, that's about $7,000. So we in Canada are legally allowed to give up to $7,000 of private and public funding towards an election. And of that $1,750 that we can give, approximately $650 of that, approximately a half, can be used as a tax deduction or tax credit. But you can't today, we as Canadians, we can't use the 50% rule on the 1750. So if someone had the ability to give 7,000, they can't use as tax credits 3,500. They can only use 650. I believe it's 650, which brings up a lot of questions about, are the elections being skewed towards people who have the ability to give, let's say at a maximum 7,000, or if you wish, to consistently give 1,750 and use the 650 tax credit, or is that not the truth? Because I believe it is. So what we're doing is people who have more disposable income, who are more affluent, have greater wealth, they are able to consistently, give more funds to support their party of choice and potentially help that party to obtain office, to have the majority. So This funding does not equate equally across all parties, which brings a lot of other new issues into the equation. So parties that can obtain more financial support from wealthy donors, obviously they can do more in terms of advertising. They can give rewards out to mobilize supporters, this sort of thing. The downside of that is the criticism of it is that larger parties, like the two that most of us know, they have stronger fundraising networks. Newer, smaller parties, they struggle to compete, which brings the point of the whole democratic voting thing activity is skewed. So let's take a look at approximately. Okay, do want to bring that up. I want to bring up elections. Elected Expenses Act of 1974, which introduced spending limits, disclosure rules of public reimbursement elections. So a question arises. I've got the numbers here. I just got to scroll down a little further. Should political parties be funded mainly by their supporters through donations, or should taxpayers fund parties based on votes received so that every vote has equal financial value? Which is really interesting. Let me expand this out. Okay, so I was thinking, should all parties be capped in terms of their spending, their maximum spending, which makes one consider, I think there should be equal spending caps for all parties. It sounds fair, but it creates other problems. The case for equal party spending and spending caps is that every party could spend exactly the same amount if they had it. Voters would hear competing ideas on a more equal basis. Wealthier parties couldn't dominate the advertising system. Elections might be more about ideas and less about fundraising, and new parties can compete more effectively against established parties. The underlying democratic principle is one vote should matter more than $1. And of course, as with everything in this world, society, regardless of science, the planet doesn't turn on gravity; it turns on money. If you don't have the money to support your cause, it's a tough fight. So the case against equal spending caps is parties with millions of supporters should be allowed to raise more money than parties with only a few thousand supporters. Okay, I get it. Fundraising itself reflects democratic engagement, I guess. A party running candidates in every riding has higher legitimate costs than a party running only a few candidates. Okay, I accept that. And strict equalization may require larger public subsidies from taxpayers. For example, a party with candidates in all 343 ridings received the same funding limit as a party contesting only 20 ridings. Many would say, no, that's not right. And let me get down to the numbers. Canada already has limits the amount of parties can spend during election campaigns. They're not equal for every party, and I've got the numbers coming up. They are tied to factors such as scope of the campaign and electoral participation. Let me get down here. Okay. A possible middle ground is a compromise. Every eligible party, and I guess that brings up the definition of what's an eligible party, and I didn't get into that. I'm not trying to make a university course on democracy. I'll leave that for a university or college if that's something they want to explore. But Perhaps every eligible party gets a base amount of public funding. Every party gets the same national advertising cap. Additional funding is allocated according to votes received in the previous election, which kills the opportunity for a new party. But in any case, so this combines equality of opportunity, voter support, and protection against the influence of wealthy interests. A great question or thought is, in a democracy, should political parties compete for votes, or should they also compete for money? It's kind of difficult to separate the two. So what are the caps? For 2025 federal election, the party spending limit depended largely on how many electoral districts ridings it contested and the number of voters in those districts. Election Canada calculates the limit using the formula set out by Election Canada Act .elections plus one. So some examples, I found the numbers. The New Democratic Party, the Conservative Party, and the Liberal Party are all limited, capped out at 35 point, as my friend Danny wants to microanalyze, 35.87 million for the NDP, 35.85 million for the Conservative Liberal parties. The People's Party, I don't know who that is, but it was in the stats. And the Green Party are capped at around 26 million, and the Bloc Québécois at 8.42 million. And I made a note, the reason the Conservatives, Liberals, and NDP have nearly identical caps, there's a little bit of difference, not very much, is that they ran candidates in almost all ridings. The Bloc Québécois only runs candidates in Quebec, so its cap is much lower. So that's the current model. An alternative model is every registered party gets exactly the same spending limit. This doesn't mean they have the funds to spend to that limit. It simply means they have the same potential cap. This would maximize formal equality amongst the parties, but critics argue it would ignore differences in campaign scope and voter reach. And of course, like the Green Party is only limited at, I don't know, 24 million, was it? Doesn't matter. 24 million as a cap. I'm sure they don't spend 24 million. They probably don't have it to spend. So we could frame it this way: is fairness achieved by giving every party the same amount to spend, or by giving parties spending limits proportional to the number of Canadians they seek to represent? It's an interesting question. So I'm coming to an end. This week I'm trying to be more focused. My other podcasts, it's a learning experience. I think this is podcast 18 or 19. And my other podcasts, I believe the weakest component was that I tried to cover too much material. They were too broad, and I just tried to do too much. I'm not trying to reiterate or compete with a university, primarily a university degree in economics or political science. They have potentially 8 months to cover a 100 level course. And then if they go into more depth, they do a 200 and a 300 and a 400 level course into master's levels. I don't have the time for that, but I tried to cover too much in my first 17 or 18 podcasts. It was a mistake. So now I'm just trying to cover a topic and not trying to bring anybody to a conclusion, but just trying to elucidate a few points, and perhaps someone will come away and say and question what's going on around them. So we began this podcast. It's going to be a lot shorter, with a simple question: is democracy more than 30 seconds with a pencil? It's questionable. I guess you could look at it from two viewpoints. From our viewpoint as the voters, I would say that we are confined, and democracy for us is pretty much the time that we walk into the voting booth and put our X in the box. I don't think we're respected beyond that. I think we're lied to consistently. I think the governments misrepresent us, misrepresent themselves to us. This party floor jumping nonsense, which doesn't occur in the states because they have the ability in the Senate and the House to vote as they want. In Canada, they just seem to walk across the floor. But in any case, so maybe democracy has more than one vision. As the populace voting, maybe democracy for us is only 30 seconds, because we can't do a DAMN thing about it between actual elections. But maybe democracy from a party viewpoint, they look at it from the perspective as, oh, they're doing a great job and representing all Canadians and so forth. So I think it's a different perspective. Democracy is not just the vote. It's not just the ability to vote, to make a decision. It's a time span. And I think that clearly democracy for us Canadians probably is 30 seconds. Past that, it's all BS. Democracy doesn't exist. In any case. So our power in a democracy is simply that 30 seconds. We can vote the liars and cheaters out at the next election. And hopefully the number of people disenfranchised will make that vote and get rid of some of these people. But they're usually replaced with more liars and cheaters who just don't follow the platforms. They always have an excuse. And by the way, I'm not saying that all politicians are liars and cheaters. Nope, I'm not saying that, even though that's probably the way I feel. Okay, so let's talk. I'm coming to an end. I'm going to make these podcasts shorter. I was watching a podcast from the States on these lionfish, which are an invasive species of fish, and they're really good podcasts out there, really good ones. And they said they're keeping their podcasts between 20 and 40 minutes because people don't have the time or the patience to watch anything longer. So I'm going to do the same thing. I might put up a second podcast during the week. In other words, 2 20-minute podcasts a week instead of one longer one. But I'm definitely going to cut them way, way back. So I had explored the idea that when these, and I am coming to a close, when these parties and candidates are running on a platform with a party, that there needs to be a legal responsibility to them to act as they have stated they're going to. But I'm not one that wants to add more laws to the system. More laws mean more lawyers. More lawyers, enough's enough. But it it brings up the point that in public life, if in the right circumstances, if you say you're going to do something, you have an obligation, a legal obligation to do it. I came up with a good example, and where is that darn example? Okay, I'm going to come across it at the end of this. But in any case, we don't, if we need a plumber or electrician or a carpenter or someone to, do lawn maintenance, we don't need a legal 600-page contract drawn up with 600 lawyers. We don't need that. Um, a verbal contract is binding, and if someone acts on a verbal contract, um, it's binding. And these governments, or the candidates who run, I don't think we need to come up with another election law that says you ran on this platform, you said you're going to do X, Y, Z, so damn it, you're legally bound to do it. But it sure would make the process a lot easier. We as the voter would know exactly what we're buying, what we're getting, we understand the promises and what these candidates are stating they're going to do. It would make things a lot easier. I think it would put some legitimacy back into democracy, where now I and others see democracy as a joke. Like my friend who doesn't even care about voting, he says, "Who cares?" And as others I know have said, "Who cares who gets in? They're all liars. They're all cheaters. They all misrepresent the facts. It doesn't matter. It's ketchup or ketchup or a zebra or a zebra. It doesn't matter. They're all the same. It just doesn't matter." If we look at these governments talk about balanced budget and lower taxes, it's like saying, how can I come up with an analogy? To have a balanced budget with lower taxes is insanity. And anybody out there who thinks that any governments, well, let's stick it to Canada, a Canadian government is going to have a balanced budget with lower taxes, yeah, you got to have brain damage. It's never going to happen. Probably never going to happen. You can't have the way this government and most governments, they spend and spend and spend. How can you have lower, and the deficit gets larger and larger? And as I did one podcast on, the government's harassing, and I wish I could use more profane words. I want to, but I can't. The government's harassing legal vetted firearms owners who bring approximately, I think the number was 50 to 55 billion dollars into the Canadian economy. They're just harassing them. Leave them alone. And they're bringing, they're trying to harass international students coming in to study into Canada. They're vetted. And they also, I don't know why the numbers are somewhat the same, but these students are also, international students are bringing another 50 to 55 billion into the Canadian economy, and they're harassing them. What's going on here? This is just, how can you have a balanced budget when you're killing all of these legal, vetted, constructive activities into Canada, and at the same time say you're going to lower taxes? Well, come on, that's just pure insanity. I mean, anybody who believes that needs to. I don't know. I can't say it because I'll get banned. But and they also say, "Oh, balanced budget, lower taxes, increase healthcare spending." You're right. How can you do that? It's just pure garbage. And should these candidates and should these parties be legally punished for coming up with all this crap? I don't know. I'm not one to promote more laws, but in public life, if you say you're going to do something and you're a business, then you're more or less obligated to do it. And if you sign a contract with any trade, electrician, plumber, carpenter, renovator, whatever, that if you sign a contract, um, and they're obligated to do the work and you're obligated to pay the fees. The same with government. They run on all these public platforms, and the contract is with the population of Canada, the people, and they don't do it. So why do they get a free ticket? Um, in any case, these parties just abandon everything. They don't care. It doesn't matter. So it creates accountability without turning every political change into a court case. They don't care. They know that there's no laws that say they have to stand by their mandates. Um, but the question becomes, should politicians be judged on the promises they make or on how effectively they respond to circumstances they could not predict? Well, every government that gets into power, into office, they don't come up with global wars. They don't come up with global events that make them change course. They just change course as they want to. And you find me, I think I'm okay to say this, you find me any private company or private or public company that that can't, that must spend within their financial means. Otherwise, if they spend too much and they don't have the revenue to cover it, then it's called insolvency, bankruptcy. And I suppose you could turn around and say that most governments, and I guess today I'm only concerned with the Canadian government's bankrupt. It's spending money it doesn't have. And the latest number I perused was, if the government turns around and said, okay, we're going to a balanced budget, and the way we're going to do it is every Canadian, regardless of age, every single Canadian is going to be burdened with a proportion of the national debt. Last I heard, it was approaching 60,000. So the government could have a balanced budget or a zero deficit if they said, okay, every Canadian is now got a $60,000 debt. Pay it off in your lifetime. If you don't pay it off, then when you pass, your state will be burdened with that $60,000 per person. But the government can do that. Or they can say, take out a mortgage for $60,000. We don't care. We want $60,000 from every living person in Canada. They could do that. I wonder if that's what could happen. In any case, and we briefly discussed this crossing the floor jumping issue, which I see as, it's not that democratic. It's just more crap. What it brings to my mind is, if a candidate jumps from one party to another, why? What have they been promised? What's the bribe? Are they going to undertake a major portfolio? Are they going to have? I don't know how the money is given out, but are they going to receive more financial compensation? What promises have been made? Why do people jump from the Conservative to the Liberal to the NDP? Well, why do they jump? They don't jump just because it's fun. They jump for a reason. And when they do it, I think there's something going on. And I believe that if there's a floor jumper, they lose their seat. Then there will be trigger a by-election, whether it's quickly or whether it's have a by-election every 6 months. But they lose their seat. I think this only makes a lot of sense. And then it brings up the issue of, does the seat belong to the elected representative, or does the seat belong to the people? Well, I stand by what I believe is democracy. It is a seat in government is held by the people. But then it brings up the dichotomy of people vote for the person, or do people vote for the party? And even if people vote for the party, well, there's this floor crossing nonsense. Anyway, it goes on. So so a lot of issues about democracy. It's a bunch of questions. Who gets to vote? Who gets to run? Who funds these campaigns? How much influence should money have? How are elected officials held accountable? What happens when they break promises? What happens when they switch parties? Who actually owns the seat? The voters, the party, or the elected representative? I think they're all valuable questions. And in terms of democracy, if democracy is going to continue, then we need changes. We need voting rule changes, campaign finance rules, spending caps, disclosure requirements. We have broken promises, party discipline, floor crossing, lack of recall mechanisms, long gaps between elections. Maybe we need to do what the U.S. does, and they have presidential elections every 4 years, but maybe and the VP and the Secretary of State, they're every 4 years, but they have elections to the judiciary, not to the Supreme Court, but to the general judiciary. They have elections staggered. I believe they're every 2 years. They have local elections for the Senate and the House of Representatives. They're all staggered, and maybe we need to bring this into play. That judges in Canada need to be elected, and there has to be regular elections every 2 years. Perhaps this will make these elected officials more responsible. So I did want to bring something else in before I kill this one. Oh yeah, I was debating. Okay, probably had enough for this. How long has this one gone on? For nearly an hour. Okay, I guess that we're speaking about the 1750 electoral caps that, or 7,000, if you wish to go all four components of it, that a person can contribute and use this $650 tax deferral. Well, this is for citizens. Well, what happens if a corporation with a lot of money, if they say, okay, I've got 1,000 employees, I'm going to give them $7,000 each employee, but it has to be used in the electoral process as we demand. How do you follow that one? And if that is a plausible thing, then corporations bypass the $7,000 per person cap. And then I'm coming to an end. Enough. Going back to one of these great questions, why isn't the Senate in Canada elected? I remember the Triple E elected, or was it NK? Elected, effective, and representational, but that's not it. But why isn't the Canadian Senate? We're supposed to be in a democracy. What's democratic about the Senate? It's always loaded up to give a majority of the senators to the existing to the party in power. What's elected or what's democratic about that? It's all crapola. It's just plain garbage. And I don't know why Canadians aren't outraged about the Senate, because it's just ridiculous. I don't know why we don't have absolutely set in place, etched in stone electoral dates like the U.S. has. When I read it, it's a flexibility issue. Yeah, right. Okay, well, all right. I can't criticize everything, but okay, that's the end. That's all I've got for now. Yes, I rambled too long, and I've gone for an hour and 23 seconds, but I think democracy is interesting. I believe I'll look at the options or the alternatives to our democratic system next week. But in any case, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. I guess that's it. Thank you, and have a good week, everybody. And as Ringo Starr says, peace, everyone. I hope you have a good week.